Honestly, I thought of starting this off with some sort of an introduction, but you don't care. Many thanks for pretending to hear anyway, but we both know you don't. And your first question shouldn't be, who is this guy? But what separates this guy's raging reply from all the other raging responses to any of your videos out there on the web? And rightly so. But rather than cutting to the chase, I thought I might answer that question and tell you that I'm an avid follower of yours, Movie Bob, ever since your first video appeared on Screwtack's G1 Submission Sunday, and a huge Metroid fan myself. So yeah, I think you know where it's going to go from here. But, on another level, I do realize that you've created these Overthinker episodes to generate some form of intellectual thought from the general community, and I honestly hope to give you some food for thought for a change when I demonstrate to you that Samus is not a statue, and has had male authority figures and emotional challenges in her past titles which have helped her to develop as a strong and independent woman, and that Samus's personal emotions and orders from Adam is not the problem with Metroid Other M in and of itself, that instead most of the bickering with Other M comes from the way in which these challenges are presented and handled, rather than this simply being Samus's first time showing her true colors. And I'm sure we'll do some minor bickering in and out as well, like how the Prime series is a first-person adventure and not a first-person shooter, so please don't try and degrade it as such. So first of all, for any of you out there that feel Metroid Other M, especially you, Movie Bob, was the first Metroid game in this series to characterize Samus Aran, you would be wrong. The first real game to give her any character outside the brief introduction monologue of Super Metroid was Metroid Fusion. But you remember Metroid Fusion, right, Movie Bob? You know the one game you didn't bring up in Heavens to Metroid? The one game where Samus actually talked for the first time in a video game? Where she was firstly under the command of Adam Malkovich, a male protagonist recreated as a computer program? We had the internet back then when that game was released, but I don't remember anyone bitching about these two facts. Maybe it was because Samus didn't have a voice actress, or maybe it was because her male authority figure was a HEL 9000 type AI, which I think is your only reference to Metroid Fusion really in that episode. But honestly, those are just BS reasons. The fact of the matter is that Samus Aran has had a lot of male authority figures in her past titles, as well as emotional challenges to overcome for the success of her missions. The only difference is that those stories were well done when compared to that of Metroid Other M. Going back to Metroid Fusion, Samus begins the game with an almost near-death experience thanks to the effects of the X-Parasite, and yet is still ordered to go in and investigate the mysterious explosion that rocked the biological space labs, even when that same explosion awoke a nameless fear in her heart. So with that, we can at least extrapolate that Samus Aran is the type of person to continue on with her missions, even in the face of fear and weakness, demonstrating her mental strength as a character. Not only that, but she continues on to explain her discontent with having to take orders from some arbitrary computer before she realizes that it's Adam Malkovich programmed into it, that she is even someone who dislikes taking orders just in general. All of this, along with the fact that she is mostly a solo bounty hunter, does in fact establish her as a strong and independent woman. I wouldn't say she's an ice queen, but she can be seen here as setting aside her emotions for the good of her missions, and this can be seen throughout the duration of Metroid Fusion, as Samus faces the SAX, holds her suspicions of Adam's orders, and even outright goes off on her own to find her own power-ups, much to the anger and chagrin of the computer ordering her around. Samus Aran is very much a strong and independent woman in Metroid Fusion, while still taking orders from the ship's AI, even when it is reflective of a past male persona. But Metroid Fusion isn't the only game in the Metroid franchise where Samus had to overcome some emotional hurdles or take orders from another male figure. No, look in fact at the Metroid Prime franchise, such as the poorly voice-acted commander from Metroid Prime 3, or even more so, the most underrated of the entire Metroid saga, Metroid Prime 2. This is the one Metroid game where I feel Samus really is up against some of her greatest fears and insecurities. The game starts off with her ship being disabled, stranding her on a planet that is essentially out to get her. The atmosphere of dark aether burns her armor, the Ing have eradicated the military soldiers and rule more than half the planet, and a darker, more powerful Samus is out to get her, and when first confronted with all of this, she gives up, as Dark Samus breaks the light crystal protecting her, and the Ing begin their slow approach. Rising her arm cannon in the air, you can almost hear her silently screaming as she shoots upward in a vain attempt to call for help. It is only through luck that she falls back into light aether, granting her sanctuary and the ability to try again. You can say that I might be reading into this a bit too much, but I really don't think so, for the game continues on, and in almost each cutscene, Samus can be seen as having expressions of worry, doubt, and fear. Even at the very end of the game, she is completely and utterly disgusted at the appearance of Dark Samus. And how does it all end? Well, with all of Dark Aether collapsing around her, and the Ing blocking her only exit. But even when faced with all these insurmountable odds, she is still able to pull herself together, overcome her fears, and make one final dash for that exit. And it is through these trials that she becomes a stronger person, with more confidence, as can be seen by her final farewell wave to the people of Aether who applaud her exit. She even takes one final look back, proud of her accomplishments, and finally at peace with the mission's end. It is really a great story depicting wonderful and strong character development of a silent protagonist just through her reactions to the trials that she had to face when dealing with all the evils of Dark Aether. And this was all to save another man's planet. I mean, her ship was in self-repair for most of the game. She could have just waited around and then left. But no, she helped out Umos, the last of the Luminoth, and did it for free too, I might add. This is sort of contrary to what the generic image of a bounty hunter is, and in my opinion, helping someone save their home planet for free and putting your own life at risk really is the furthest thing from some sort of an ice queen. I mean, in your video you asked where we came up with the idea of Samus as a strong and independent woman, and that it wasn't from the games. But guess what? I have news for you. Yes, it was. This is how she is depicted in them, and it's not only in Metroid Fusion and Prime 2, but in all of her other titles as well. You might want to call this projection, but the fact of the matter is that in all of the Metroid games, Samus was a female bounty hunter, making her a strong and independent woman, and that is just by going on the definition of the job itself. She is not part of the military, meaning that any job offered to her is taken on by her own choice. That is independence and freedom right there for one. She has gone through many trials, strengthening her as a character, and in some of these trials overcoming emotional hurdles for the better of her mission, making her a stronger person. And of course, as we all know from the first Metroid, that Samus Aran is in fact a woman. This means that she is a strong and independent woman, and is presented as such in her games. It doesn't mean that she is a pathological ice queen, especially considering how many times she has rescued animals, or infant Metroids, or even a race of people like those on Aether. She has emotions as everyone does, but in all of these past titles they are either used for good, like rescuing something, or presented to her as an obstacle to overcome, or even just her own reflection on the events surrounding her. All of this is pretty much a good and typical way to treat emotions when dealing with almost any character, male or female, in any medium. But this is not the case in Metroid Other M. Instead, Samus is overtaken by her emotionally frail state, never overcoming her insecurities, and is instead held back as a woman by her emotional struggles. And this is where I feel most of the controversy over Metroid Other M comes from. Even in the very beginning sequences of the game, Adam calls Samus an outsider. She quickly reflects on these words and is hurt by his rejection. It makes the player feel like Samus was cast out of the regular military and is looking for her place back in and under Adam when we all know she can't have it. This is further supported by Samus's eagerness to follow Adam's orders in the following scenes after the first boss fight, but according to Other M storylines, Samus left the military and Adam's command on her own. She was never cast out. It could be that she is just needing a bit of support after having lost the closest thing she had to a child, that being the baby Metroid, and is looking to Adam for that comfort, but the story really doesn't make that clear. In reality, Samus left Adam and is a bounty hunter. She could have gone on that ship on her own and searched the whole place by herself without having taken any of their orders. I mean, they couldn't even get the front door open, for crying out loud, without Samus's help. So even right there is some character inconsistency just in the story of Metroid Other M itself. Along with that, Adam constricts Samus's ability to use her equipment. Samus does agree to this, and that's fine, but there's little to no explanation as to why Adam is restricting certain abilities for each of his troopers. He explains why power bombs can't be used, but that is about it. I mean, Samus is not even allowed to use her own ice beam until later in the game, while all the other troopers start off with that exact same weapon. I suppose that could be because maybe Adam does not fully trust Samus, but then again, that might not be true. The game really never explains why Adam is restricting Samus more than the other troopers. But even with that, according to Metroid Fusion, Samus went off on her own anyway when under the command of the computer Adam, and found and used her own abilities. Yet in Metroid Other M, Samus doesn't even attempt that until she loses complete communications with Adam. And as we all know, she sort of restricts herself to the point of stupidity, like burning herself because she was not told to put on her Varia suit. I mean, it is one thing to limit the use of your weapons for the safety of others, but it is unrealistic, even in that universe, for Samus to willingly burn herself just because she wasn't authorized to activate her fireproof suit. There was no reason for her not to turn on her Varia suit. In fact, she could have even just radioed Adam and asked him if it was okay to turn it on. I mean, why not that? It goes against common sense to burn yourself when you know you have easily accessible protection against it. It presents Samus really as just a stupid person who won't speak to a man unless spoken to, even if it means hurting herself in the process. And to me, that does sound pretty damn sexist. It hurts her image as a character and just isn't good story writing, plain and simple. And you know, even when looking beyond and giving Metroid Other M another chance, the game continually goes against Samus's past image of being a strong and independent woman, especially when faced with Ridley for the 5th time. But let's take this in chronological order here. Samus faced him in Metroid, Super Metroid, and Metroid Primes 1 and 3, making it the 5th time in Metroid Other M. Of course, Nintendo has decided to be retarded and drop the Prime franchise from the main Metroid storyline, for Other M's sake, so I guess this would be at least the 3rd time. But going even deeper than that, let's say that she thought she had finally beaten him in Super Metroid, that she had finally conquered her longtime foe to only be faced with him again, causing her post-traumatic stress. Even with all of those elements in place, they certainly do not help Samus Aran develop as a character in Metroid Other M, and in fact it does quite the opposite, for when she finally does face him for the 3rd time, she freaks out to an extreme extent and almost causes the death of one of her fellow comrades. Along with that, she is overtaken by Ridley, and even when she does fight back, Ridley escapes, and then rather than have Samus face him again, he is instead found dead later in the game. She never truly confronts him, or overcomes her fears of facing the creature that killed her parents. So you see, Movie Bob, her reaction is strongly out of place here, and you really need to read into this scene a lot for it to even make the slightest bit of sense. And even with all of that, that same scene still only hurts her as a character, especially when Anthony is right there next to her, remaining calm, cool, and confident in juxtaposition to Samus's little freakout. It causes her to appear as a weaker character in almost direct relation to her emotional female response, while the big strong man does all the work and practically sacrifices himself for her sake. But you know, Movie Bob, even when looking beyond all this, the game still fails on many more levels in both of its story writing and gameplay. Samus is monotone in her reflection and overly emotional in dire situations. She has a poor economy of words and overuses words like Baby Metroid, or gives titles to things that don't need it, like calling the traitor a deleter for no reason. The deleter himself is never discovered or reflected upon, and is instead simply forgotten about later in the game. Adam pointlessly sacrifices himself to save you from having to go into Sector 0, when in the end you still have to face a Queen Metroid. Sure, you can freeze these guys, but there have been many sequences where Samus hit the self-destruct button and made a run for it. Why couldn't she have done that there? The story in and of itself is full of holes, incomplete, and hurts Samus's persona of being a strong, independent, and caring female human being. Instead, she is presented as a whining, emotional woman who can't keep it together. Along with that, the player is constantly brought out of the game with having to switch between third and first-person view to fire a missile, and that is made even more impossible when you are trapped in a corner while enemies that can only be defeated by missiles constantly charge at you, bringing you out of that mode. The game has you on a constant linear path with other people, when most Metroid games are about isolation and exploration. The sound effects are barely reminiscent of their past entries, like item collecting and returning from your save file. The music is terrible and barely reflective of any of the past Metroid scores, and even on just a mechanical level, there's a gameplay-breaking glitch that if you save your game at a past save slot after having beaten a certain boss, you're screwed. You either have to send your file into Nintendo or start the game all over again. I'm sorry, Movie Bob, but this game is an incomplete and jumbled mess of a title, and this is coming from a franchise that prides itself on perfection. I mean, most people consider games like Super Metroid or Metroid Prime to be the most complete and perfect games on their consoles. So for Metroid Other M to come out with gameplay-breaking bugs, difficult and poorly implemented controls, along with a terrible story that degrades Samus Aran both as a character and as a woman, gives Metroid fans such as myself pretty much every right to get pissed off and bitch all we want about Metroid Other M. I can understand that you like this game, and you know what, that's fine with me. I'm glad you liked it, and I would also love to see more established titles take huger risks like this one. But I would also love for those same titles to work. Like, I don't know, Metroid Prime for example. I mean, if Zelda 2 was a risk, then certainly taking Metroid from a side-scrolling platforming shooting adventure title to a first-person adventure title was certainly a risk in my opinion, especially after the impact of Super Metroid. But Metroid Prime 1 was a very well-received game because it was a very good game at the end of the day, unlike Metroid Other M, which only helped to fuel the fire when people wanted to complain about how Adam was treating Samus. Experimental titles should be supported like your BioShock or some of my personal favorites like A Boy and His Blob or Silent Hill Shattered Memories, so that the industry will continue to expand and innovate rather than keep producing gray shooter after gray shooter. So I get where you're coming from, but Other M was really not that good of a game, at least in my opinion, and I think those who complained about it have a very valid reason to do so. And while I have agreed with a lot of your past episodes, I'm happy to disagree with this one. It gives me something to reflect on, and hopefully this response gives you something to think about as well. And hey, if you still strongly disagree with what I have said here today, I would be more than happy to debate you on the subject any time. I still think you're a great guy who has a lot of good stuff to say about the gaming industry, and I look forward to your next video, as well as the next Metroid game. Good luck to you, and hopefully I will hear back from you soon. Game Over Analyzer out.